I'm Alistair Stevens.
I'm Elizabeth Ray.
And Tom Cruise is Dr. Bill Harford in Eyes Wide Shut. One of the things that you and I do as good and generous and positive readers of texts, whether we're talking about novels or TV shows or films or whatever, one of the things that we will do is go in with a open mind and a positive heart. We want to appreciate things in their best light.
Yes.
Would you say that's true?
I would say that's definitely true. Yeah.
And one of the places that takes us is a willingness to acknowledge that certain interpretations, certain textual readings might be valid, might be present in the text, but as we so often say, you've got to want it.
Right. Yeah.
Stanley Kubrick makes a lot of people want it. A lot of people over the years have looked at his body of work and have sought additional layers of meaning, of significance, of symbolism.
And found it.
Much so, in fact, that he has taken on, particularly posthumously, this characterization of a genius filmmaker, of a mercurial genius, of someone who is so subtle and so masterful in his manipulation of the audience that really any interpretation of any of his films must be valid. I mean, not everyone gets a whole documentary dedicated to the discussion of conspiracy theories which arise from a fairly straightforward horror movie. I'm referring, of course, to Room 237, the documentary made about 1980s The Shining. We are not particularly Kubrick fans. Is that fair to say?
We're not, which is weird because you compared him earlier today to Lynch, particularly this film, particularly Eyes Wide Shut to Lynch.
I would maybe go so far as to say only this film, but yes. I think this is his Lynchiest moment, for sure.
It is, yeah. And I will forgive Lynch so much and follow his magic, but I think that the Stanley Kubrick magic doesn't really hold my heart.
I think that Kubrick's reputation kind of gets in the way, though. Lynch is so open and magical, and so willing to just be spontaneous and let these accidents be what they are. And perhaps Stanley Kubrick was like that on set too. In fact, many stories attest that that's exactly how Stanley Kubrick was. But his reputation as this master puppeteer, his reputation of precision and of excellence and of an absolutely indefatigable demand on his cast and crew. I think that those two things stand in opposition. I don't think that you can have accidental brilliance and a complete painstaking taskmaster on the same project. And overall, I think that Kubrick is, in fact, more the former than the latter. I think his reputation as, a Fincher, as a Myers, as someone who demands 100 takes of every single action. He did do 100 takes of every single action, but it was in pursuit of something rather than forcing his actors and his crew to conform to his didactic directorial vision, right? He is reportedly, particularly in this stage in his career, a very collaborative filmmaker and just very relaxed about the passage of time. If you come on set and you're not feeling it today, don't worry about it. Go back to your room. Just go hang out. We'll shoot it all tomorrow. No one is watching the clock on this set.
That's cool.
Which is why this is the longest shoot in history. The Guinness Book of World Records says that Eyes Wide Shut is the longest film shoot, 400 uninterrupted days. That's not the complete shoot. They just had to take a break then for a little while. 400 uninterrupted days, almost 2 years of active production on a shoot that was supposed to last for 3 months.
Oh my God.
We are going to talk all about this film, Eyes Wide Shut, Stanley Kubrick's capstone to his career, the movie that was completed to some extent shortly before his death and released right after he died. We're going to talk about this entire film. We're going to break it down, and we're going to try and figure out if there is any there. Before we do that, before we even get to the trailer game, a quick word of warning. I know that we're like an explicit podcast. I know we occasionally say the F word, and we're going to say it a lot this time.
I think so.
The discussion that we have of this film is necessarily going to be really pretty sexual.
Pretty explicit, yeah.
Yeah, so if you were listening to this with kids in the car, then maybe not this one. Maybe go back and listen to our discussion of Jerry Maguire, which was really sweet.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, it's your turn for the trailer game. How are you feeling? Feeling confident? Feeling ready?
How can you get it wrong?
That's a great point. You could say anything. And someone on Reddit would cite it as the proof of their personal pet theory about this film. You're absolutely right. Okay, here we go. Just random word poetry. Let's go.
Okay.
Bill,
what sex is? I have never heard of sex. Do you know what a cult is? I have definitely never heard of a cult. Wink to camera. I think that sex might supposed to be good, but only bad people have it. So how can it be good? Maybe I want to be bad. I should look into this for both of us. I'm sorry, darling. I checked it out, and sex is definitely bad. And it's for bad people, and only bad people do it. And you and I, we'll just have to keep having boring married sex and never talk again. But let's fuck. This Christmas, Stanley Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut.
So to clarify, we like Nicole Kidman.
Yeah. She's terrible in this. It's someone's fault. I'm sure that's not hers.
I think
it's
so
Alice's fault. First of all, okay, I said this to you this morning, but I'm going to say it again first thing on the podcast. There are no characters in this movie. These two people are just weird man shape, woman shape. I don't quite understand. Alice, especially though, is just walking around half asleep, speaking so slowly. I don't like once she's high, so it's like, okay, I can forgive that. And once she's supposed to be drunk, but basically all the time. I don't know, man. There are some performance choices happening here.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were hers.
Let's kind of take our temperatures right here at the beginning, because obviously you are not enthusiastic about this movie.
I'm not enthusiastic about the script. There are a lot of things about the movie that I find really lovely and haunting and beautiful. The production design is over the top extraordinary. But the movie doesn't do anything for 2 hours and 40 minutes. And for a movie that's about a sex cult, it's so boring. I'm so intrigued by this.
Yeah. And I mean, I can't refute any of that. I mean, I think I can refute your assertion that the production design is great, because some of the production design is extremely bad. Hey, did you know that this was supposed to be New York? Like, actually really New York, and not the corner of a soundstage at Pinewood and some dubious rear projection.
Wow. I confess that did not bother me. I liked those outside shots of him walking in New York at night, although there was like nobody there.
There's nobody there, right? They famously say that at nighttime in New York, there's nobody there. It's known as the city that goes to sleep, right?
I liked that, though. It made it feel so creepy and eerie.
Yes, but not in any way authentic.
Not in any way authentic.
Like, this does not feel...
I don't think the movie wants to be authentic.
Well, and that's partly the thing, is that it feels so much like a dream from the jump.
Yes.
And there's so much to talk about. Yeah,
yes.
I think that I'm at least interested in possible readings of this film.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm interested in the possibility that what Nicole Kidman is doing in particular is not just conscious, not just deliberate, but is in fact good, that is in fact ambitious, and that she is hitting at the heart of something about this film that isn't necessarily translated to the audience directly, which is to say that, I guess, I'm letting her off the hook, I suppose. But I think that, I think there's a complexity there that we'll hopefully get into. I guess we should begin by talking about Kubrick himself, right?
Sure. Yeah, let's.
So let's do the quick biography here. Kubrick's born in Manhattan in 1928. He graduates high school with a D+ grade average, which, coupled with the mass of returning soldiery from the European conflict in particular, means that college is just not on the table. He gets a job as a photographer, and rather charmingly, as a chess hustler in Washington Square Park.
Wow.
Which is cool.
That is cool.
He takes a few night classes in photography at the City College of New York, but then by 1951, he produces his first short film on a rented camera, a 16-minute black and white boxing documentary called Day of the Fight. He makes it for $3,900 and sells it to RKO Pathé for $4,000. That's a $100 profit, which is more than a lot of movies make.
It is.
He quits his photography job. Archaeopathy give him the money to produce another short documentary, this one called Flying Padre, about a Catholic priest in New Mexico whose parish is so large that he needs to take a prop plane from one church to another in order to deliver his sermons. By the middle of the following year, Kubrick's ready to start making narrative features. He shoots the anti-war movie Fear and Desire for around $50,000, and it loses money. He goes on to direct another documentary called The Seafarers to make money for his next feature, which is called Killer's Kiss, which is released in 1955 and also loses money. Despite failing to achieve this commercial success, Kubrick is making a name for himself as an inventive and intelligent and painstaking director. He's hired to write and direct an adaptation of the Lionel White novel Clean Break, which is released in 1956 under the name The Killing. This time, the budget's $320,000, and it loses money. Really setting up a chain here. It impresses MGM enough, though, that they hire Kubrick to direct an adaptation of the Humphrey Cobb novel Paths of Glory, which is released in 1957, and, drumroll, actually makes a very modest profit, $1.2 million off of a budget of $900,000, and Kubrick has arrived. And from there, it's Spartacus in 1960. This is the last film that he produces in the US before moving to England full-time in 1961. He produces Lolita in 62, Dr. Strangelove in 64, 2001: A Space Odyssey in 68, A Clockwork Orange in 71, Barry Lyndon in 75, The Shining in 1980, and Full Metal Jacket in 1987. And that is it until Eyes Wide Shut in 1999, which is, as I said, released 4 months after Kubrick's death in London. Dismissing the first two features, which Kubrick did in his life, he considered them his practice work. He didn't really count them in his filmography. That's 11 films in 43 years, never twice in the same genre, never twice with the same techniques, and every one an artifact, every one a studied piece by a man considered one of the great masters of the form.
What do you mean by not with the same techniques?
In every film, he would come up with some new way of shooting, right? We created very elaborate sets for 2001: A Space Odyssey so that we could do the zero-G stuff in a way that was really convincing and honestly as good as anything that we could make today. It's outrageous how good some of that stuff is. Of course,
the Steadicam for The Shining.
The Steadicam for The Shining, absolutely. Yeah. He invents a whole new way of processing film for Barry Lyndon so that he can light the sets naturally with candlelight, but they won't be, entirely black when you're watching the film later. For Eyes Wide Shut, he invents a whole new way of shooting and processing the film so that you shoot very quickly and then develop over a longer period of time, which is what gives you all of this intensity of light. It's what makes each of these tiny little points, these twinkle lights in the background, it makes each of them distinct and radiant and makes all the color so saturated. That's an entirely new chemical process because we're still shooting, chemically on film.
That is my favorite thing probably about the movie.
It looks sumptuous.
It really does.
It looks so luxurious. Yeah. And then when it doesn't look luxurious, for example, when we're in Dr. Bill's office, it looks so austere. And it's just, so grimy and terrible. Yeah. So what in Kubrick's filmography stands out to you? We mentioned The Shining. We mentioned 2001. Are you a fan of Dr. Strangelove? I can't imagine you're a fan of Full Metal Jacket.
Yeah, most of them I haven't seen. I've seen most of Dr. Strangelove. It's my dad's favorite movie. So I've seen it on at the house a lot. The Shining I've seen a couple of times. You and I, of course, recorded a podcast about that for one of my English classes.
Yeah, we could drop that in the bonus feed, I guess, over on the Patreon page if you had in mind to.
That's a great idea. We should do that. We absolutely should.
It was really the prototype of this show.
It was. Yeah. And then the other one I know the best is Clockwork Orange, which I had to study in 2 different film classes. So that one I've seen and written about at length.
And presumably you're a huge fan of all that it has to say about the world.
Listen, the guy has style. Let's not pretend. But I don't know about the substance there.
Yeah, that one in particular, I think, is a challenge. Though it is, in accordance with the rest of his filmography, because he would almost entirely adapt existing work. He wasn't interested so much in telling his own stories. He was interested in taking an established piece of work and weaving his magic through that adaptive process. And that's what gets us, this enduring body of work. It is hard, even for someone like me. I'm not particularly a fan of Kubrick's work, and yet it's hard to take away his position as one of the most significant filmmakers of the 20th century, because if nothing else, the man was influential as hell. Man has led more people to film school than maybe anyone but Scorsese. I think it's a remarkable impact that he had on the industry, despite well, relatively contributing so little. This is what, less than a quarter of Scorsese's filmography?
Yeah, that's a point. What about you? Do you have any of his films that you like and go back to? Like, I could see you being a 2001 guy.
I do think that 2001 is genius, but even when I was, 12 years old and I watched that film for the first time, I was already such a fan of Arthur C. Clarke that I preferred the book. I preferred that mode of science fiction. And though the end of that film is so visually impressive, I also find it narratively incoherent, which I think is a recurring problem in Kubrick's work. Definitely. He is just more of a filmmaker than a storyteller.
He doesn't seem to care about that, though, in the same way that Lynch doesn't, to bring it back.
See, I don't think he cares about it in a different way than Lynch doesn't. I think that he and Lynch find themselves in the same place, but from different perspectives. I think that he is just much less willing to be, deliberately ambiguous and more willing to be weirdly veiled and mysterious. It feels as though Kubrick is in a contest of wills with his audience much more than David Lynch is, for example. I think that Lynch is happy for you to access his art or not. He's happy for it to work for you or not. And I think that Kubrick is much more dictatorial. Like, I think part of his reputation as a tyrant on set, which, as I've said before, is largely unearned, particularly by this point in his career. But much of his reputation as a tyrant on set, I think, comes from how didactic his editing process is. He was heavily invested in post-production, even back before, post-production was what it is today. And his films seem to have such a powerful purpose behind them that their narrative ambiguity just really does create space for speculation. It really does. It's very difficult to go into any of his films and be completely sure exactly what happened, particularly when it comes to the motivation of characters. He seems very disconnected from the human beings who ostensibly occupy the heart of his films. He's not a narrativist. He's a filmmaker. And I think that those disciplines oftentimes overlap, but in this case don't so much. The other thing which defines the shape of Kubrick's career is his preoccupation with certain ideas to which he keeps returning. He will have potboiler projects that he just runs with for years and years and years and goes off and makes another film and then comes back to it and then goes off and makes another film and then comes back to it. His Napoleon film, for example, he wanted to make a biography of Napoleon and never did. That is why Ridley Scott made his biography of Napoleon, because he wanted to one-up Kubrick, which I think tells you everything you need to know about Ridley Scott, honestly. He starts working on an adaptation of Brian Aldiss's short story Super Toys Last All Summer Long in the early 1970s, and he keeps coming back to this project every couple of years, waiting for the technology to develop to the point that he can make this story about a little robot boy. The technology isn't quite there yet. He shelves it, does something else, comes back to it. The technology still isn't there yet. By the middle of the 1990s, when the film really goes into pre-production, he tries to hand the project off to Steven Spielberg with the idea that this movie, which was then called AI, would be closer to Spielberg's artistic sensibilities. Spielberg refuses. He says, no, it's your project. You should absolutely make this. The technology's still not there yet, but it will be very soon. Then, of course, Kubrick's already in production for Eyes Wide Shut. He dies shortly after completing this film. And the Kubrick estate goes to Spielberg and says, would you please take this film and finish it? And he does. And yeah, that's AI, artificial intelligence, which
I really liked. I haven't seen it in a long time, but when I saw it in theaters, I loved it. And I think I even bought it on DVD or whatever.
Yeah. But I think it's such an interesting fusion of Kubrick's big ideas. So obviously all this short story too, but Kubrick's big ideas with Spielberg's heart and humanity.
Humanity and characters that you can actually empathize with. Yes.
I mean, it tells you something that repeatedly throughout the development of this project, which he's, working on and off for 30 years, every now and then he'll go back to it and think, maybe I should just take this idea that I have and make Pinocchio instead. I'm glad that we don't have a Kubrick Pinocchio.
Yeah.
I would kind of like it if people stopped making versions of Pinocchio, honestly, but here we are. Every filmmaker, for some reason, wants to make that film. So similarly to Super Toys Last All Summer Long, Kubrick buys the rights for the 1926 Arthur Schnitzler novel Traumnovelle, Dream Story, in 1968.
Dream Story.
Yes. After apparently being given the book a decade earlier by Kirk Douglas on the set of Paths of Glory. The novella is set in Vienna at the end of the 19th century and is focused on the experience of a Jewish doctor, Fridolin. Kubrick keeps returning to the idea of adapting this novella. He thinks about casting Woody Allen in the late 1970s. He thinks about casting Steve Martin in the early 1980s.
Weird.
But there's just never space for him to get this production rolling until like 1994. And the shape of the novella is very much the shape of the film. It's an interesting overlaying of one text on top of another, because while the events depicted are largely the same, if you can, transplant late 19th century Vienna for late 20th century New York City, except not really New York City, then yeah, the stories unfold in very similar ways. But there are some real inflections that are put on this text by Kubrick, which I guess we'll get into as we start moving through the plot of the piece. So Kubrick gets the go-ahead from Warner Brothers in the early 1990s, but they have one condition: you have to cast a star. He didn't cast anyone of note and name in Full Metal Jacket, and Warner Brothers believes that cost that film a lot of money at the box office, which, I don't know, I'm not sure that's a defensible position really, but they keep looking back and saying, you haven't cast a major star in one of your films since Jack Nicholson in The Shining, and that was in 1980, and yes, but that was one film ago.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that it's as much the perceived box office failure of Full Metal Jacket as it is Warner Brothers' insecurity about a weirdly horny sex film.
Fair enough.
Kubrick originally wants Alec Baldwin and Kim Basinger, which is wild to consider.
It is, but I can see it.
Yes, though it's a more squalid film.
Yes.
It's a nastier, dirtier, like much early 90s or Basic Instinct kind of movie.
Which I'm not sure I don't want from this.
It's certainly a take.
Right?
It's certainly a thing you could do. He then wants Bruce Willis and Demi Moore, despite Bruce Willis and Demi Moore being just a little older. And yeah, not sexy. Really. Power. I like both of those actors just fine, but really powerfully not sexy. So instead he goes to the obviously sexy choice of Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman. But there is, I think, something really important in that, which is that from the jump he is considering partners. He is considering people who are in a relationship or are married in real life. And I think that is a bad idea, because I think that from the jump, Tom Cruise is great casting for Bill. Like, he is obvious casting for Bill. We are doing throughout this film exactly what we always want you to do with Tom Cruise, which is to put him on the back foot, make him feel low status, make him feel like he's got something to prove. And I think that works for him. I'm not sure, aside from Cruise, that we would ordinarily cast Kidman in this role. What do you think?
I would agree with you. She is a woman that reads so smart and competent and autonomous that putting her in this shell of a wife who can't communicate, who seems to have no real desire or ability to lead the plot on her own, particularly the scene where she gets high and starts arguing with Bill, falls completely flat for me and reads as... It's not even flat. It's like ridiculous. It reads as ridiculous. Yeah. And I have trouble trying to picture somebody else in that role, but it's clear that there's a casting issue happening.
I think so. And I think that is in part why I am maybe a little defensive of Kidman's work in this film, is because I can see her striving to get to the heart of something for which she is perhaps not perfectly suited.
Yeah.
Maybe you would go to someone who is just... I don't know. You could think of not quite contemporaneous, but of course, when you think of Kidman, you think of Naomi Watts, and I can picture Naomi Watts doing this role.
And
being frazzled in a way that Kidman does not communicate really ever on screen. I can't think of her being frazzled.
No, and when she does try to do it, it always reads as strange. Yeah, it never quite works. So I do like, Naomi Watts is a great pull for this one. She has something that's much more tragic and wounded and vulnerable than I think I ever get from Kidman.
And of course, we're thinking about Naomi Watts probably because, yes, Kidman,
Lynch,
of course, but also Mulholland Drive, which is, or it could be, considered a sister piece to this film. I think that they inhabit very similar spaces.
I agree with you there. Yeah, I like to think of them side by side.
I think that there's an interesting distinction between, as we draw a comparison between like East Coast noir and West Coast noir, I think that we could look at this as a kind of East Coast dream noir and West Coast dream noir.
I know which one I prefer.
I know which one I prefer in both cases.
Yes.
The other thing that we should probably acknowledge as we're talking about the production of this film is the place that it occupies in Cruise's personal timeline, though it's not maybe what you might think, because the myth of Tom Cruise has kind of changed our understanding of Eyes Wide Shut. The story as it's commonly understood now is that he and Kidman go off to England, they shoot this film for 2 years, and it shatters their marriage, and they immediately divorce, and he immediately slips into his decade-long decline. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's just not true. They complete this film in 1998, and they don't divorce until the spring of 2001. Each of them makes 2 more films between now and then.
Oh, wow.
And furthermore, it seems as though, by Kidman's account most of all, as though their time together on this set was the happiest of their entire marriage. They're there for 2 years. They've never spent this amount of time together without one of them jetting off to go and make an entirely different film. They have their kids with them on set. It's very familial. It's very domestic. It's very ordinary.
Probably not on set, but yeah.
Not on set, sure. But, around. Yes. Absolutely. Their kids in real life vanish whenever necessary, just like the kid in the film does.
Nice.
Right? Amazing vanishing children. The greatest invention of the 90s.
Really?
But they just have this very cozy and familial environment. Kidman talked years after all of this went down about making spaghetti and having Stan come over after a day's worth of shooting, and it was a very low pressure environment because at this point Kubrick can just take all the time that he wants and does. He's also very respectful toward Kidman personally. He, for example, told her very early in the process that when she was going to be nude on screen, when she was going to be in a state of undress on screen, he would privately show her all of the dailies that they would take during that shoot. And then she would be allowed to trash any that she didn't like.
Wow,
Just
that's nice.
Sight unseen, no contest, no argument. She could take any footage of her in a state of undress that she didn't like, and he would destroy it, physically destroy it right there in front of her.
That's nice.
He does take that a step further, though, and I think that this is perhaps where we can see some kind of Machiavellian aspect to his working style, because when he shoots the scenes with Nicole Kidman and the extremely handsome Gary Goba, who is the fantasy naval officer. Yes.
Sure.
Who is, if you guys just go look him up, he is sarcastically good looking. He is just, if you ordered one very good looking man.
And it's specifically not Tom Cruise type too. So that's nice.
Not looking entirely like Tom Cruise, yes. But I mean, there's a kind of a resemblance when he's in his uniform. When he's in his uniform, he doesn't not look like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, right?
I mean,
the idea of a naval uniform is that you make everyone look the same.
Yeah, more like Val Kilmer, I would say. But yeah, I hear you.
Which would also, I'm sure, tweak Tom Cruise, except Tom Cruise never saw him. Kubrick deliberately did not introduce the two actors. He kept them apart. And when they shot that sex scene that is intercut through the film as Bill's fantasy of what her fantasy would really have been like dreams within dreams, layers within layers. When they shot that sequence, which lasted for 3 days, Kubrick arranged it so that Cruise would not be allowed anywhere near the set, and arranged most of it to take place when Cruise was actually absent from the set entirely. So he didn't see any of that footage before the film was finished.
To what purpose?
To create a distance in real life between Cruise and his wife.
Huh. Okay.
It's loaded, right?
It is.
It's a psychologically challenging thing to do to your actors. To give him in real life the experience of not knowing about this very sexy time that, and of course, not really sexy. We mustn't fall into the trap of actually believing that shooting sex scenes are sexy. Yeah, right. But, this connection, this intimacy, right? Even if you preclude the idea that shooting sex is sexy, we can acknowledge that it's very intimate, that these two actors were very close together, and that this is an experience that she had that is completely her own, that he was not a part of, explicitly. And I find that...
It's interesting.
I find it interesting. Yeah, I don't find it cool. I don't find it good.
I don't find it cool or good. I don't think it was particularly effective either. My whole thing with that sequence is that for him imagining his wife with this other man, she doesn't seem to be having a very good time.
But I think that is completely intentional. I think that Bill imagining his wife having sex would not include her having a good time.
Okay.
This is why I think it's so important that it's his fantasy of her fantasy, that we never see this event from her perspective. We see nothing from her perspective.
Huh.
I'm going to be making an argument as we move through this, I think, that part of what her story is about, that really all of what her story is about, is the realization that her husband does not see her, that her husband does not know her, and that her giving voice to her secrets, even when perhaps she ought not to give voice to her secrets, to her fantasy, to her dream specifically, that she is doing this because she wants to be known. She is opening herself up with the hope that he will apprehend her fully. And we can talk about whether or not that happens at the end of the film. Spoiler, it doesn't. I don't think that it happens at the end of the film, but maybe there's an interpretation that we can find that will say that it does.
Maybe it might. Maybe there's hope that it will.
Yeah. Filming eventually ends in June of 1998, and Kubrick begins his post-production phase, which is intense. He finally shows Warner Brothers a cut of the film on March the 1st, 1999, and then 6 days later, he dies.
Wow.
The studio then takes over completion of the project, and this is incredibly controversial, particularly if you are a dyed-in-the-wool Kubrick fan. You will lament the fact that the studio took over and changed the director's vision. The degree to which they altered his vision is unclear. It seems as though it's very little, bordering on none at all. It doesn't
feel like somebody really went in there and edited it hard, I have to say.
If you were going to do that, particularly if you were the studio and you were trying to make this more commercial, you would have done more, I think. Yeah. But they're working with his widow, they're working with his estate, with his representatives too, to try and be considerate. They're working with Cruise, they're working with Kidman, because they also have a certain amount of input on particularly nudity releases, right? They get final cut on any scenes that involve them being naked. That said, Kubrick was an obsessive editor, and the fact that this film wasn't going to come out for another 3 months means that he would have spent another 3 months editing it. So it probably would have been tighter, if not fundamentally different. Long after the fact, some people close to the production did say that Kubrick was specifically unhappy with the production cut, which is, 99% of the finished movie. But Jan Harlan, the executive producer and Kubrick's brother-in-law, and Todd Field both say that Kubrick loved the movie and was proud of it, even in its almost finished state.
Okay.
One big change was made after the fact, and it's very difficult to get a hold of now because of the way that films are distributed. Under his contract with Warner, he had to deliver an R-rated cut that they could show in theaters, because if he only delivered the NC-17 cut that he wanted to make, they would have lost so much money, because you just can't get an audience for an NC-17 cut in movie theaters. This cut, the R-rated cut, was accomplished after the fact by the studio going in and superimposing digital composites over the lewder sex acts through the orgy scene. Primarily just black-robed figures who stand completely stock still in front of the action so that you can't see what is happening. Occasionally naked women standing, shot from behind, standing in front of the action, because naked women shot from behind are R-rated, actual sex acts, NC-17 rated. This is just the world in which we live. It's weird. You can find it online if you go and look on YouTube, but all of the released versions now, I believe, are the NC-17 cut. So you get to see the unexpurgated action and maybe wish that you hadn't.
What's strange is that watching the movie did not feel particularly NC-17 to me. Like, there were a lot of sex acts, I suppose, but I feel in my gut that I have seen more explicit sex than that, but I think it's just because the sex has been hotter.
It's literally,
and this is not hot sex.
Yeah, the MPAA doesn't care about hotness. The MPAA cares about what you are depicting and for how long and between how many people. And there is a lot of sex in this film that is not cloaked through edit or cinematography in the way that we normally cloak sex scenes.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, fair enough.
Apparently, there were major cuts made, and this is while Kubrick was still alive, there were major cuts made to the fantasy sex scene with Alice and the naval officer, because he allegedly said when they began shooting it that he wanted it to be almost pornographic. He wanted it to be extremely explicit, and it's not, thankfully.
Not at all, yeah. Okay.
There's one other posthumous change to this film. The voice of the masked woman at the orgy had to be dubbed because the actress in that scene, Abigail Good, was English and could not do a convincing American accent. So realizing that it had to be changed, the studio talks with the estate, they talk with Cruise, they talk with Kidman, and Cruise and Kidman recommend a young up-and-coming actor that they know in LA, Cate Blanchett.
That's so wild to me.
Who dubs all of that dialogue and is uncredited and did not talk about it publicly until 2018. And now that you know it's her, you can absolutely hear it.
Yeah.
But not knowing that it was her, it's a really great performance.
Okay, that's really cool.
So let's run through our cast, a very small cast in this film. Really, we should talk, of course, about Nicole Kidman, who we've talked about previously in Days of Thunder and Far and Away, and this is going to be our last opportunity to talk about her in the context of Tom Cruise's filmography, though I'm sure she'll come up in casual conversation in films a couple of weeks from now. After Far and Away, she has appeared in the Aaron Sorkin scripted Malice in 1993, opposite Alec Baldwin and Bill Pullman, the very sentimental My Life with Michael Keaton in 1993. Have you ever seen My Life?
No.
I watched My Life in maybe 1995 or 6 when I was going through a Keaton phase and wanted to watch everything that he had done. And I remember that film being incredibly heavy-handed and sentimental. So not my favorite. She plays famously Dr. Chase Meridian in Batman Forever, which is the Val Kilmer, Tommy Lee Jones,
I remember her
Jim
in that.
Carrey. I think she's kind of good in that film. I think that she gets, in that film as in this film, I think you can argue that she is hitting a tone that the film wants and that no one else is capable of getting to.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think it's, I think it's an interesting and kind of, influential and emblematic early role for her. She's also, that same year, the lead in Gus Van Sant's To Die For, where she seduces high schooler Joaquin Phoenix and convinces him to murder her husband, Matt Dillon, so that she can continue her career in local television.
That's wild, but okay.
Eventually getting Joaquin Phoenix and his buddy sent to prison for, I think, like drug possession or something. And then the whole story is unraveled, and it's a noir tragedy where the villain, of course, suffers the most at the end. Weird film. From there, she takes the lead in Jane Campion's Portrait of a Lady in 1996 and is praised, liked more than that film is, certainly. She appears with George Clooney in the action thriller The Peacemaker in 1997, and that doesn't totally work either.
I only remember trailers for that.
And then she's in Practical Magic in 1998.
There it is.
Sandra Bullock and Diane Wiest, and Stockard Channing, of course, is so good in that film. Is Practical Magic your vision of Kidman at this point in the late 90s? Did you already have a sense of her from that film?
Yeah. No, her from that and in Batman. That's how I think of her.
I mean,
at that
good
stage.
roles. Yeah. I would say they're her best, post Far and Away roles for sure. She also appears in the Sam Mendes production of David Hare's play The Blue Room in London in 1998, which is why she and Cruise meet Kubrick in the first place. Not least of all, because The Blue Room is also an adaptation of the work of Arthur Schnitzler, just like Eyes Wide Shut. Isn't that weird?
That is weird.
She is, for the first time, partially nude on stage, which means that this is a phenomenon in the very salacious British press of the time.
Of course.
And the perception of the production is that it and she are very sexy, and that's not hurt by the other actor in this intimate little two-hander. There is no way that you could guess which actor appeared naked on stage with Nicole Kidman in 1998 in London to huge acclaim and celebration.
I can't wait for you to tell me.
Ian Glenn, Jorah Mormont himself.
I love Ian Glenn. Okay.
That might not be a name that resonates hugely with the audience at home, but it's certainly a name that resonates hugely with you.
It does, yeah.
Tell me about your love of Ian Glenn.
I just love him, yeah. Great voice, great energy. I love Jorah Mormont. Yeah, okay, cool.
I remember a Christmas during the pandemic when, during a late and grim night, you and I went looking on YouTube for Scottish television New Year's Eve celebrations of my youth.
Whoa.
Do you remember finding a lot of like very chintzy Scottish local television?
Yes, but
BBC
I think that
Scotland
was
productions?
Burns Night, is I think what that was.
It could have been Burns Night during the pandemic too. Yeah, I just remember it being the pandemic, and let's face it, all of that is a blur. And finding Ian Glenn reciting, Burns poetry, certainly.
Yes. Yeah, I think
job.
that was Burns Night. That was lovely.
Great.
He's great. Yeah.
This is going to be our last chance to talk about Nicole Kidman as an actor. So we should note that she will go on from here to be nominated 4 times for Best Actress at the Oscars, for Moulin Rouge in 2002, for The Hours in 2003, which she wins, which must have really stung for Tom Cruise, Rabbit Hole in 2011, and Being the Ricardos in 2022. She'll appear in Cold Mountain and The Stepford Wives and Bewitched, one of the most unhinged and ill-conceived films of all time. That film is bizarre. She will famously go on to play Grace of Monaco to little success, and she'll famously go on to be the villain in Paddington to huge success. Yeah. She'll appear in an adaptation of Donna Tartt's The Goldfinch, which nobody liked. Yeah. And never forget, she's also Jason Momoa's mom in not 1 but 2 Aquaman films.
That's right. It's a good paycheck.
It's a paycheck.
Yeah.
It's a paycheck for sure. As I said, her experience on this film is extremely positive. It's 2 years with her family and seems to have been a very happy time for her. But
well, that's good.
Unfortunately, things are going to get a little harder for her in the very near future, and then much, much better in the extended future. We should mention Sidney Pollack, who plays Ziegler in this, of course.
I like him.
We talked about him previously because he directed The Firm. Through the 90s, he has phone relationships with Kubrick because Kubrick is isolated in London and doesn't get the gossip of Hollywood, but kind of needs to know what is happening. Mm-hmm. So he and Pollack would apparently have like 8-hour phone conversations just talking about all the minutiae of the business from time to time. He's also kept up with Cruise, who respects Pollack so much after working with him on The Firm that for years after he would go back to him and ask for career advice and for guidance, what projects he should take next. Harvey Keitel was originally tapped to play that role, to play the Ziegler role, but dropped out / was fired, depending who you talk to. It is said that he quit after doing like 80 takes of walking through a door or whatever the exaggerated Kubrick version of that is. Right. Some people say that it was simply a scheduling conflict that meant that he, had to leave. And some people say that he did not fit in the mode, in this very quiet, domestic, intimate kind of production set that they had going there. Jennifer Jason Leigh was also hired for the film, but had to drop out because of a contract she had signed for David Cronenberg's Existenz. And it's maybe hard to determine which of these films is less sexy. It's certainly easy to determine which of these films is trying harder, but I can't imagine you're a David Cronenberg fan. No. Did you ever see The Fly?
Once.
Yeah, that's probably enough.
Yeah.
The other person we should talk about, of course, is the aforementioned Todd Field, who plays Nick Nightingale, which is, by the way, an all-time strong character name. Nick Nightingale, extremely good. Yeah. Todd Field is born in 1964 and had already made a pretty successful career as an actor before being cast in Eyes Wide Shut, and would go on from this, the same year really, to appear in one of my favorite TV shows of all time. He is Rick's architectural partner in the firm that they run in Once and Again.
Yeah.
He's awful in that show. He plays a villainous, terrible person, but yeah, he's still pretty great. But his time on Kubrick's set really inspires him to move into directing. He directs his debut film In the Bedroom in 2001, which is nominated for 5 Academy Awards.
Yes.
It's followed by Little Children in 2006, nominated for 3 Academy Awards. And of course, Tar in 2022, nominated for 6 Academy Awards.
I didn't realize. I still have to see Tar.
I kind of wish that he would act a little more as well. I kind of wish he would take the Pollock route, right? Direct by all means, and then just occasionally act in things, I think. Yeah, he's extremely good in this. I really like what we do with Nick. Yeah. The film opens, weirdly, July 16th, 1999.
That is so bizarre. This is definitely a Thanksgiving release. It's so weirdly Christmassy.
It's so Christmassy.
It's so set at Christmas. Like, it's not a Christmas movie, obviously, but it's so set at Christmas. How strange to open in July.
If there is a way that you could read this as a Christmas movie. I wonder if you could read this as a Christmas movie in the same mode as A Christmas Carol. I wonder if you could read this as, a supernaturally inflected morality tale that is supposed to assert conservative normalcy on these people who are daring to think about having sex with other people. I'm going to be that guy writing an awful Reddit post, aren't I? I'm going to be that guy. It opens alongside the very silly Bill Pullman giant crocodile movie Lake Placid.
Oh, yeah, sure I do. Lake Placid was cool.
The Omar Epps Taye Diggs coming-of-age story, The Wood. The B-tier, C-tier, maybe, Muppets in Space.
Oh,
maybe my least favorite Muppets movie, I have to say.
Yeah.
And also released this same week, albeit much more quietly, is the film that would change the face of modern horror. This week is the release of The Blair Witch Project.
Whoa, yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Uh-huh. Strange week at the movies.
Eyes Wide Shut wins the week. It wins #1 at the box office and is the 6th Tom Cruise movie in a row to win its opening weekend. That's cool. Jerry Maguire, Mission Impossible, Interview with the Vampire, The Firm, and A Few Good Men, because Far and Away was beaten at the box office its opening weekend by David Fincher's Alien 3.
Weird, but okay.
Neither film really endured, I think. No. Neither film really left much of a footprint on the cultural consciousness. Also in the top 10 the week that this film opens, it's week 2 of American Pie. It's week 3 of Wild Wild West and of the South Park movie, if you remember that one. Week 5 of Tarzan. Week 6, dizzyingly, of the first Austin Powers movie.
What a dark time for film.
And week 9, speaking of a dark time for film, week 9 of the 7th best mainline Star Wars movie, I will be taking no questions at this time, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace.
Yep.
Eyes Wide Shut opens to $22 million, which beats expectations and goes on to a domestic total of $56 million, a worldwide total of $162 million, which is the proof, if proof were needed, that this film is better regarded outside of the US than it is in the US. The critical response is generally positive, but when it was more negative, it was negative with a kind of befuddled confusion. It was negative with a kind of, I don't know why this is bad, but I think it is bad. Equally, the people who said it was good also didn't know why. And there is, whether you respond positively to this film or negatively to this film, there is a real question mark hanging over the sexiness. Is this film supposed to be sexy? Some people thought that it wasn't, but that it is sexy. Some people thought that it was intended to be and wasn't. And, you can mix and match that matrix however you like. Scorsese writes in an introduction to a book on Kubrick just a couple of years later, quote, "When Eyes Wide Shut came out a few months after Stanley Kubrick's death in 1999, it was severely misunderstood, which came as no surprise. If you go back and you look at the contemporary reactions to any Kubrick picture, except the earliest ones, you'll see that all of his films were initially misunderstood. Then, after 5 or 10 years, comes the realization that 2001 or Barry Lyndon or The Shining was like nothing else before or since." And I like that as an encapsulation of Stanley Kubrick's career because I think it is objectively correct.
Yeah.
Whether you like him, whether you dislike him, whether you find meaning in his films or you find artifice within his films, there's no one like him. None of these films could be made by any other director.
Right.
There is no confusion there.
Yeah.
Ironically, perhaps, Eyes Wide Shut is the one that is closest to the vision of other directors in that it's not dissimilar to what David Lynch is doing or to what some of these...
But you still get so much of that like classic Stanley Kubrick. Obviously, this is him. All the tracking shots especially. Like it feels very Kubrickian.
He's got away with the tracking shot, that's for sure. I think cinematically this is a really beautiful film. The cinematographer on this film had never worked as a cinematographer before. He had been a gaffer with Kubrick on previous... This is the thing about Kubrick, is that Kubrick ran a very tight and small and intimate set. There's a story, Tom Cruise toward the end of the shoot is in pre-production for Magnolia, which we will talk about on the next episode of The Last Star in Hollywood. And there's a story about Paul Thomas Anderson coming to the set of Eyes Wide Shut and being bewildered that it was so small and intimate. 5 or 6 people in the entire crew for a day's shoot.
Wow.
And Kubrick kind of looks up at him from his directorial chair and says, well, how many people do you have on your set? And Anderson flees the set. Like, he does not want to answer that question because he is embarrassed and ashamed.
It's so many. There are so many people on sets, and so many of them spend a lot of time standing around. Yeah.
Interestingly, in the years since, Anderson has slimmed down his own production team and now has as few people on set as he can get away with, which I think speaks to a certain influence there. So that's all of the production story for this film. Where are you now in our discussion? Are you warmer than where we started? Cooler than where we started? Have you been unchanged by this logistical accounting?
Interested, I suppose. I don't know that I'm warmer necessarily. I'm still confused by it. I still think that it is bad, but I don't quite know why it is bad, other than the very clear there are no characters in this film. But other than that, it's so obviously beautiful. It's intriguing, of course. I think mostly for me, it's just too long, too slow. Has maybe the worst soundtrack I have ever heard.
I think that is... I don't even want to talk about the soundtrack on this one because it is so poor and intrusive. And I get minimalism, you guys. I get minimalism. I like minimalist soundtracks. I absolutely do. But that just recurring accelerating beat
piano thing.
Yes.
Yeah.
This is not, Jaws. This is this requires something a little more intentional and a little less modern, perhaps. This doesn't quite feel as though it's entirely
I don't even know if modern
is
what I got. I got like a 6-year-old practicing classical music. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God, is it supposed to be Helena? Have you just unlocked a whole new interpretive lens through which we might view this film? Does she have a piano anywhere in her bedroom? She doesn't play with the piano in the sequence at the end in the toy store that I recall, though she does conspicuously play with the baby carriage. Did you notice that?
I did notice that.
It's all about reproduction, really.
Well, that is the only way that you can have sex that is good and pure, is to make a baby.
I guess before we get into it, I do want to ask you one more question. As a queer woman, how did you feel about the depiction of female nudity in this movie, which has no male nudity? Basically,
yeah, you get a little bit of boy butt, and that's it.
A vanishingly small amount, like a rounding error amount of boy butt, and a ton of specifically and blatantly objectified female nudity, like consciously and diegetically objectified female nudity. How did you feel about it?
I mean, I think you pretty much answered it. It was absolutely exploitative.
I guess I'd want to clarify too a distinction between that objectified nudity that we get during the orgy, for example, and the much more casual nudity that we get. There's the topless woman in the doctor's office that
was my least favorite one. That to me was the most exploitative.
The same way.
At first, I was like, "Oh, is that Mandy?" And when it wasn't, I was like, "Fuck you, film."
That would have been so much better. Yeah. I think that I mentioned earlier the way that we shoot his doctor's office as being just kind of like just commonplace, right? Just every day. It is not spectacularly lit like the other sets. It just feels like it's in another world, and making her topless in that scene felt exploitative.
Absolutely.
In a way that it doesn't perhaps feel exploitative in other sets. But I guess I'm really contrasting the women at the parties and Nicole Kidman's casual nudity when they are at home in their domestic environment.
I don't mind Nicole Kidman's casual nudity as much, I think. Or partial nudity, I think, worked even better. What could be interesting about that is, kind of the cliche thing that people say, oh my God, why are you going out to go pay for sex when you have Nicole Kidman right there at home? Like, she's obviously just stunning. So I think we're showing something between the divorce of her feeling confident and beautiful in her body, which she clearly does, and being able to express that sexually and romantically with her husband, which she cannot.
Yeah.
So something there is interesting, and so I'm here for it. Similarly, Mandy's nudity is supposed to be an oh shit moment, and she's supposed to be like quite vulnerable, and we're supposed to feel, oh my God, what is happening? And so all of that works for me too.
Yeah, we're never situated in a perspective where we're supposed to appreciate or enjoy it, I suppose. Yeah.
Right, absolutely. In the orgy sequence and at the party, it's of course exploitative, but I think that's purposeful because the cult itself is just one big upper class white male fantasy.
Manifestation of power and of wealth, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the thing is that ultimately I don't understand the sex cult orgy because very few people seem to be having any fun there, for one. And if you're going to be throwing a giant sex party, shouldn't it be a little bit fun? And if it's not fun, if it's religious instead in intent, and this does have so much religious iconography, like the cardinal guy swinging his incense and doing the Gregorian chants.
But insubstantial religious iconography of the kind that you would associate with a sex cult, right?
I suppose
and of course,
so.
Before we spend 3 hours in the orgy, we're going to invoke Bacchus. And yeah, okay, we get it.
Well, everyone just stands around, again, looking deeply uncomfortable.
Yeah,
so I don't know. I question the point of this and why Ziegler is like, well, you can see why everybody wants to hide this so much. It's like, can you?
Yeah,
people have sex a lot, you guys. Like, people have their friends over and lots of people have sex pretty frequently.
Well, and that I think is the response, right? Is that the reason that you make it so arcane, the reason that you keep it secret in particular, is that it's not actually about sex, is that it is about power. It is about the exercise of power. These people can do whatever they want because they are aristocrats, right? Because they are in a higher social order. And I think that is one of the major themes of this film, is that social mobility is an illusion. That you can never actually meaningfully change who you are and where you come from.
Okay, that is much more interesting. And it helps me kind of to solve the puzzle of this sex cult. Because then all of these women who are so exploited at this party are in fact sex workers. He said that the one girl especially ended up being Mandy, the girl from the party before. So
ambiguously, the girl from the party before, yes.
Okay.
I'm going to say,
if she's not that, go ahead.
No, I hear what you were saying. If she's not that, this does not line up and does not make sense.
And it's really the only plot point the movie has. So we need it to be not ambiguous.
That Mandy from the Christmas party,
right,
that Alice also attends, that Odie's in Ziegler's bathroom, and the masked girl with Cate Blanchett's voice from the orgy party are played by different actors.
I don't know why. Unless they're trying to just gaslight the whole thing and not let you guess it, or they want it to be ambiguous.
Is Ziegler telling the truth? She's dead of an OD. Is she really the same girl as the girl who OD'd in the bathroom? Or does he just say that because, he's establishing a pre-existing drug problem?
Sure.
Did the masked cult take action against this woman? Was her sacrifice more meaningful than Ziegler suggests? Because Ziegler says it's all a fake, it's all a charade.
Yeah.
But
it had to be her, because how else would she recognize him and be like, I have to get you out of here. You don't belong here.
That's a great question. That is a great question.
Although she was so drugged up, why would she recognize him?
This is a deliberate ambiguity in the film, is that, because the whole thing works in a really noirish way, right?
Mm-hmm.
It works as like a traditional kind of plot that you would attach to a story of this type, except that they're played by different people.
Yeah.
And that's a weird turn, particularly for a production that ran for 2 years, where they could probably have gone back and reshot the earlier stuff if they needed to.
Yeah. Okay. Well...
We'll get to it, I promise.
Okay.
We've got so much to discuss. Let's get into it. Let's meet Bill and Alice Hartford, who are, non-specifically wealthy in New York City.
But not that wealthy.
Interestingly wealthy, right?
Yeah, they're
very upper middle class?
Very upper middle class, yes.
Central Park West apartment, this gorgeous, absolutely beautiful apartment set is just
absolutely beautiful.
So wonderful. Clearly successful. Clearly, yes, upwardly mobile in the 1980s sense of that phrase, I guess.
But he still has to go to work every day.
But he still has to go to work every day.
You can't really be wealthy if you have to go to work every day.
And he can't order a case of 25-year-old scotch for his buddy just on the say so. I mean,
show up at parties in limos.
Exactly. That's the distinction right there. And right from the jump, I think we introduced two incredibly important themes for the whole movie. We get Bill wondering where his wallet is, asking Alice if she has seen his wallet. That wallet is going to be so important through the rest of this movie because it's the source of his seemingly endless amount of cash. I don't.
He does seem to have
$1,500 or something just in his wallet
casually
in his wallet, through the one big night that he spends out of the town.
Very important. I am a doctor. You can tell me anything card, which he flashes like an FBI badge throughout the whole movie. So it's such a strange.
It's money and it's authority, and it's literally the first thing he says. Do you know where my wallet is? Like, I need it. It is a part of my identity. It defines in large part who I am. He then goes into the bathroom where she is sitting on the toilet and she says, how do I look? And he is looking in the mirror at himself and says, perfect.
Yes.
He does not see her.
Well, and she even says, you didn't even look at me. Yeah. She does look perfect for what it's worth.
Has Nicole Kidman ever looked better than this film?
I think maybe never.
I think it's the combination of like, we're not quite at her huge natural hair. Right? She's obviously had some work done through the 90s to tame it and restrain it. But yeah, still big curly hair and those little glasses.
The little glasses are very good. Yep. The interesting thing about opening it this way is like this is the only point of something like intimacy that we see from them, but it's kind of the grossest part of intimacy, right? Like I really appreciate that, we're at 7 years together. We close the door when we go to the bathroom. Like I'll undress in front of you all day long. And it's not that I'm shy. It's just, a little bit of mystery.
To preserve a mystique. Sure, absolutely.
Just a little. Yeah.
No, I think there's something to that. There's something about the way in which they inhabit each other's space, but it is uncomfortable.
Right.
And then the ways in which they are obviously much more comfortable. Like really, we will visualize this through the rest of the movie with the bed. The bed will represent their intimacy or lack of intimacy together, right? The intrusion of the mask into the bed at the very end of the film is so important and like so visually significant and visually striking, but also thematically important. But you're absolutely right. It's this forced compatibility of these two people who are not, they're coexisting in the same space, but they're not sharing the same space.
It's almost like a locker room. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I should mention too that this is in fact not where we start the film, because we start the film with the much more provocative Nicole Kidman takes off her dress from behind and is fully nude right before the title credits. And there is some speculation that that was not intended by Kubrick, that was superimposed on the structure of the film by the studio, but I wasn't able to find like a real answer to that, and I'm not sure that it changes it. I will say that I do not like it. I do not like her disrobing like that before the opening credit, because it's neither narratively nor thematically significant. It does feel just shocking. It feels like marketing more than anything else, right?
I would agree.
So Bill and Alice bid goodnight to their daughter, who is just adorable, just a little moppet in this film, and to the babysitter too, and go off to their party, to the Ziegler's Christmas party.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interestingly laid out space. It's obviously, it's just extremely expensive, right? We're moving upward into an entire other tier of being. This is another tier of society in which Bill feels a little ill at ease already, right?
Walk me through that. How do you mean?
They wonder at first why they are invited. They kind of, muse to each other what the hell they are doing here, because this is obviously not their place. And then when they're dancing together on the dance floor, she playfully asks him if he knows anyone here, and he looks right through her and says, not a soul, which, by the way, is absolutely true. He doesn't know anyone present, including the woman he's dancing with. Like, we're just really lampshading that right early in the story there. We get the very brief sequence with Bill recognizing Nick Nightingale and going over and having the brief conversation while Alice wanders over to the bar. And that's it. They're apart now, and they're going to be split for the remainder of the evening, basically, because he is going to wind up with these two
models,
very attentive young models who want to show him what's at the end of the rainbow.
Right.
The moment where they part, where he is summoned upstairs to go and help Ziegler with what will turn out to be an OD'd girl in his bathroom. What do you take of his behavior there, where he retreats from them? Because it seems as though he is almost relieved to be leaving them, that he's not actually going to be faced with the reality of adulterous sex.
Yes, which I think he probably would have chickened out of anyway, especially since she was right there. No, I think he felt that he got off the hook. Yeah.
So what does he get from his relationship with Alice? particularly as it's presented to us here at the beginning of the film. Like, is he happy in his marriage? We know already, really, that she's not. She's not seen, she's not observed. Even, you're right, even if we take the text of the film, that, how do I look? Oh, you look perfect. You're not even looking at me. How do we read his involvement and investment in his marriage at this point?
I mean, safe, I suppose. There's something very just kind of 50s boomery about the whole idea of marriage in this film. So he's getting the place to come home to where everyone's happy to see him and he gets hugs and then gets to leave again. So in that kind of like set down your briefcase.
Safety, stability, conformity, right? There's a certain aspect of a stable family relationship that is necessary to enjoy your life at this upper end of the middle class, of the professional classes. She obviously is feeling a little more tempted to be led astray, as we learn when she winds up dancing with, what do you make of this guy that she winds up meeting at the bar? Well, Bill is enjoying his economic victory over Nick Nightingale, right? When he wants to go and rub in how well he is doing and how badly Nick is doing, which is just a shitty thing to do anyway. We cut to Alice at the bar with this Hungarian, Sandor Zsavost, at the bar.
Ridiculous.
How does this guy work for you?
He's so creepy. It's, again, like, I just don't understand these things. Like, if you're going to go to a party, why aren't you flirting with people? And if flirting with people is bad, then you should just be hanging out together. And if you're not hanging out together, what is anybody doing? Who
isn't flirting with people? I'm having trouble tracking your breakdown of this. Who is not flirting? Who should be flirting?
They are both flirting, but they are both feeling horribly guilty about it and trying to hide it from each other. And I find that strange.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's like they found themselves flirting with people by accident.
Yeah. And this is where we see her, arguably, I think, adopting a persona. I think that's one way of reading what happens to her here, because her speech patterns change and her delivery slows right down, and she's all breathy now suddenly, where she wasn't. When you go back and you look at her in the apartment, she kind of talks like a normal person.
Right, yeah.
And here she is delivering this incredibly exaggerated response. And obviously she's drinking champagne too. Yeah. But not that much.
Well, there's the moment, though, where it seems like she has almost fallen asleep in his arms while they're dancing, and then she looks up and seems surprised that it's him that she's dancing with, and that is uncomfortable.
Yes, but that's much later. That's after we've dealt with the girl upstairs. We're still in the early part of the evening here, and she's already, deep in that very slow, very affected delivery.
Yeah, I do think she's trying to figure out what a woman who was being flirted with might say to a man who was flirting with her.
Oh, that's so sad.
Yeah.
Are you interested in this as a read of Alice's character, particularly at this point, that she is wanting to be more romantic, more expressive, more seen, more realized, more appreciated?
Of course. Yeah.
That's why she stays with this guy on the dance floor for as long as she does.
Naturally.
Is that even though he is a little creepy, he's definitely giving off, like, do you sleep in a coffin full of dirt that you've imported from Romania? Sir, you have to tell me.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so you buy that interpretation of her character at this point.
Totally.
That she is playing without really knowing how to play.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Bill is, at this point, called away to tend to Mandy. We get this somewhat shocking scene, I think, right? Somewhat shocking, not least of all because we get Victor Ziegler putting on his suspenders over his bare, hairy chest, coming to the door, and absolutely normalizing. Oh, you know, it's one of those things. Here she is, a snowball, whatever they call it, the kids these days, coke and heroin, you know how they are. And absolutely normalizing this with all of the like natural authority of a very, very wealthy person who's hosting a party, right? He's almost daring Bill to say, and like, demonstrate to me that you're not cool right now. Demonstrate to me, knowing that Bill would rather die than make it clear that he does not belong in that room. And from there, we wrap up pretty quickly, I think. Bill takes care of Mandy, comes back downstairs. We get the sequence where, you're right, Alice is almost falling asleep on the shoulder of the guy that she's dancing with, suddenly feels that she has had too much champagne. They make their excuses, they leave. And then we get the return home and the making out, at least if not outright sex, in front of the mirror.
Where they're both looking at themselves and not each other. Yeah, this is interesting too.
Are we interpreting this in a particularly symbolic way? Are we interpreting this as we are looking at our other selves? We are looking at the versions of the people that we were when we had a model hanging off of each arm, or a wealthy Hungarian count probably like sweeping us around the dance floor? Are we looking at ourselves as we actually are, or are we looking at ourselves as we wish we were? Like there's some flexibility there, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think after the party, they're both feeling, desired and wanted, but not necessarily feeling any want or desire for one another, but certainly wanting
certainly precious
pleasure.
little for each other. Yeah, that's true.
But she still looks quite sad, whereas he looks pretty happy to be there.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. She is, missing the part of her that isn't being realized, that isn't being fulfilled, whereas he is checking himself out in the mirror. Hey, look at that sexy married man. Look at that success story right there. Hey, what a guy. Like, yeah, it is absolutely that conformity, I think, that you're recognizing there. We hurry through the next day. We have the contrast of Bill's day at work and Alice's day at home with their daughter, how flat and unglamorous both of their lives are, although it's difficult to be flat and unglamorous when you look like Nicole Kidman and you're in that apartment. Like, not that bad, surely.
Right.
And then all at once we're back at bedtime, and I'm not completely sure why we take a whole day to let this story play out. I guess because we need it to be the following night, right?
Yes.
We need to be ready for what comes next. This is the smoking pot scene. This is the getting high scene. This is the big confessional scene from Alice that once upon a time she saw a man and had dirty thoughts about him. Uh-oh. Okay. I'm misrepresenting that just a little bit because it's not the fantasy, right? It's not even the sexual fantasy. It's the I would have given up everything to go with this man.
Yeah.
I would have burned this shit down for one night with this dude. That is what she's confessing.
Yeah.
But that's not what Bill is going to be preoccupied by, right? He's not going to think about his wife leaving him. He's going to think about his wife having sex with this other man. Let's talk about the performance aspect first, I guess.
Okay.
It's so weird.
It's so weird.
And
I don't like it.
As I want to defend Nicole Kidman, I never want to hear anyone say the word titties with that inflection ever again in my entire life.
What about Dickie?
So bad.
It's so bad.
So here's my question, though. Is this Alice high, or is this Alice high putting on another character, trying out something else, trying a different way of being in the world, articulating herself in the world in the hope that her husband will now see her? And is there any evidence to support any interpretation of either of those things?
Yeah. I mean, she's definitely very high.
That's what we're supposed to get.
Yeah.
For sure.
Especially with the whole, like, when she gets the giggle fits there for a bit, like, she's definitely very high.
Is that the lowest point in the film?
Yes.
Yeah, it might be.
I think it might be. It's really terrible. But who hasn't been there? I know we've certainly had arguments after a third glass of wine where we're like, you know what? This is nothing. Let's go to bed. This isn't real. I don't remember what we're fighting about. You made me mad with your face.
I mean, certainly there's an element of friction here. But I like the idea that she is at least trying to accomplish something, that this isn't just picking a fight, that he's reading it as picking a fight, and really she is wanting to be understood. And if a fight is the consequence of him understanding her, then that's fine. But really it's not the fight that she wants, it's the apprehension. She wants to be seen. And of course, we can juxtapose that, as we can so often through this film, with Bill's desire for a quiet life.
Right. He just wants her to be quiet and go to bed.
Exactly, yeah.
And what's interesting is that he's not saying the wrong things, but she has no interest in hearing him say, like, the right things, the trite things. Like, she wants something that's more honest, I guess.
He's not saying the wrong things, but he's not hearing what she's really saying.
Right.
He's hearing the superficiality of it, but he's not getting the meaning. He's not understanding it really. And even, his ongoing misunderstanding, his ongoing conceptualization of this as a sexually torrid affair between the two is missing the goddamn point. That is not what it's about. And that's not what her sex dream will be about later either. It's not about sex. It's about her relationship with him specifically, right?
I guess so, yeah. The interesting thing is that this guy that she saw, the naval officer guy, she says just glanced at her.
Yeah.
So you would think, following, that interpretation, that it was more than a glance, that there was a smile or there was a look or that we exchanged a moment or something that felt real, that felt like being apprehended or seen. But
I think even that moment, sometimes just, you lock eyes with somebody across the room and you feel suddenly vulnerable, aware of yourself in a way that you didn't before. And maybe she doesn't get to feel aware of herself in that way. I would love to go through and do, I wouldn't love to, I would be pained to go through and do a careful analysis of how often Tom Cruise looks at Nicole Kidman in this film and under what circumstances and when they actually like meaningfully lock eyes, because he's giving all of that like cruise intensity here, but because it's so misaligned, because he's not understanding her, he's missing the point fundamentally.
Yeah.
I'm also bothered by this sequence because we really, in 1999, we really couldn't think of a better way of motivating this confrontation than, oh, she gets high and she says more than she intends to. Like devaluing and invalidating what she has to say in this sequence by getting her high, which puts so much pressure on the performance that it becomes outright bad.
Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't hang together, unfortunately. And from there, it's only going to get more bewildering. Bill is called to a patient's house, Lou Nathanson, who has recently died.
Oh,
he goes there. He talks with the daughter, who just cannot help herself, has to make out with him, has to tell him that she loves him, that she doesn't want to leave. She just wants to live in the same city as him. And oh my gosh, and oh my goodness. And then her fiance shows up, who kind of looks like Tom Cruise, right? Just looks like a handsomer Tom Cruise.
Taller.
Well, interestingly, he's a math professor, so he could well be a doctor as well. There's like a balance. He brushes his hair on the other side. It's a very similar Cruise haircut, except he parts it on the opposite side. So they kind of look like, I don't know, mirror images of each other. Dun, dun, dun. This is the point at which I suspect a lot of people start to lean toward the "it was all a dream" interpretation of this film, which is that he gets wickedly high with his wife. She tells him the story about being attracted to a naval officer that she saw once while they were on vacation. And the rest of this film is his, pot-addled dream. And that's, terrible, right? That's an awful, terrible, reductive way of looking at texts. Like, don't do that. It's because what you have just said is that the 2 hours that you spent watching this film did not matter at all, because dreams do not matter at all. They don't. Right? Yeah. But I could see why you would be tempted to, because we're pretty deep in Lynchtown now, right? Yeah. The dead body in the bed accompanying this entire conversation, the grief that suddenly turns to sexual desire, that turns to like a declaration of outright love, like of devotion, no less, that is then immediately cut back with the arrival of the fiance. It's soap opera. It's melodrama. It's weird.
It's weird. Yeah. That might be the low point, actually, even after the giggling. Just the I love you, you don't even know me, but I love you, which all leads up to nothing.
Yeah,
we never revisit this,
except as his first step on his Odyssean journey through the night, right? Because
3 different women have wanted to have sex with me in 48 hours.
Yes, and that number is about to go up too, because he is going to venture out into the city, walking down the street where he is casually and homophobically harassed by some frat guys for no reason.
That was unnecessary.
Yeah, just seems unpleasant, and is maybe there is an element in the original story. The character in the original story is Jewish in Vienna and is constantly harassed throughout the original novella for being Jewish. Right, it's just subjected to horrible anti-Semitic language and threats of violence against his person. Kubrick, who was Jewish, deliberately wanted to skew this instead toward, waspy Upper West Siders, right? He wanted to change the kind of socioeconomic location of this plot, and that does absolutely change the inflection of it, because you are relocating the source of this conflict and isolation to the enfranchised power set in Manhattan as a whole. So it's an interesting thing to do, but it leaves you without that same kind of public oppression. Tom Cruise is validated by his contemporary society in a way that a Jewish person, even in the same situation, would not be. So I find that interesting. But yeah, the weird homophobic assault feels discordant, I think. Though not as discordant as him stopping at a red light and being approached by Domino, you get it like a mask. Domino, the prostitute. What do you make of all this?
So here's where I come back to Bill Harford not being a real character. Because at the party, he's got 2 models on his arm. They're flirting with him in a style I can only describe as schmaltzy, like the most kind of sexy leaning in, touch my cheek, play with my hair, kind of way, which is so weird, which he seems to be kind of enjoying.
That's so interesting. I'm now wondering if they are models as he describes them, or if they are working girls who have been hired by Ziegler for his Christmas party.
That would make much more sense.
That would certainly explain the behavior.
That would make much more sense and explain the behavior. I like that. And then the woman who comes on to him, and both, or all 3 rather, of those women, he immediately pushes away and seems quite uncomfortable by their forthrightness. This woman is so forthright without actually being flirtatious in any way. Like, she's just solicitous. Like, she's just like, hey, but you want to come up to my place? It's nice and warm in there. Everybody knows what's happening here and what this transaction is.
I think that's exactly it, right? It's transactive. It puts this entire relationship back in his area of dominance, which is financial.
Nice point. Yeah.
You know, his way to access this sexual encounter is through his wallet, through the thing that he loves the most in the world.
And then he doesn't have to say, I'm never going to call you again.
Exactly right. Yeah.
I get it.
It is surprising, perhaps, how immediately he agrees to it, how immediately he warms to her, how immediately he seems to pursue, as we go inside and he starts having the awkward conversation. I suppose we should talk about money. Like, I suppose we should talk about, because this is foreplay for me. Let's talk about money and how I can exploit you through the application of commerce, right?
Mm-hmm,
this is economics are on my side because I've got a big wallet and that's what, gets me where I need to go. It's ugly. It's a nice performance. I like the girl that plays Domino. I think she's good.
Yeah.
What do you make?
She's the girl from Hocus Pocus.
Wow. Okay.
Just so you know.
All right. What do you make of the phone call from Alice and him changing his mind then to decide instead that he ought not to spend the night with Domino?
Seems plausible for this character.
It does, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If she is immediately present, I mean, he will lie to her, obviously.
Yeah.
But maybe there is, still a thin veil between his desire and his pursuit of that desire.
Yeah. Well, and at this point, it's supposed to be motivated by the fact that he's jealous of the time that she once thought about maybe being with another man physically. I guess also romantically and forever, but
yeah, every time
it's all very thin.
Every time we're in the cab, every time we're in a car, in fact, for the rest of the movie, we're going to have a flash of that fantasy scene, and it's going to seem to motivate him more.
Mm-hmm.
This only motivates him out of Domino's little walk-up that she has, and instead back onto the street where he winds up at the jazz bar where he bumps into Nick, who tells him immediately about the top secret sex party that he's going to later that evening. So,
Can't help but brag, especially after this guy just bragged to you. So.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Well, and I do kind of like that too. Mm-hmm. It's a nice enough interaction, and Todd Field, I think, does a great job. Bill has the password, and all he needs now is a costume. So what do you do when you need a costume in New York? You go to a costume rental place.
How did he know exactly what costume to get?
This is a great question. An unanswered great question. And this is the problem with Kubrick, right? Is that each unanswered great question could just be an oversight. If this film were simpler, if this film were less ambitious, if it wasn't honestly just a Kubrick film, right? If Todd Field had directed this film instead and it had been identical in every way, you wouldn't even question it. You would assume, oh, maybe Nick told him what they all wear at this party that he has secretly glimpsed, or maybe he just speculated about it. Maybe it's just a lucky guess. Maybe this turns out to be the costume shop that supplies all of the costumes for all of the high-class sex parties in New York City. This sequence I find befuddling.
Deranged.
I find it, and
everything
really
with Lily
gross.
Sobieski is so gross.
Everything with Lily Sobieski is so gross. We can move through it pretty quickly because this is just, this is shenanigans. This is, he goes, although we get the repetition of the rainbow symbolism here as well. The girls at the party had promised him what was at the end of the rainbow, and now here we are at Rainbow Fashions. Oh my God, is there a connection? Probably not. So he goes because he knew the guy who used to own this store, and luckily, though the store has changed hands, it is still exactly the same kind of business that it used to be. He gets his cloak, his hood, his mask, his tux. And then the proceedings are interrupted by the discovery of Lily Sobieski, 15 years old when she shoots this film, in her underwear with two Asian men in a back room. I don't know what to make of this. I don't know, in what is probably the lynchiest moment in the entire thing, when she slips out and is hiding behind Tom Cruise and then whispers to him about getting an ermine-lined cloak, which is so specific but weird and nonsensical in that lynching way, right? That is it because he is defending, right? Ermine-lined cloaks are symbols of regality. They're symbols of aristocracy, and maybe we are implying here that because he has stood in front of her, like interpretively in the defense of her, that maybe he should be having some kind of more glamorous, maybe she's just trying to hustle this guy and get him to rent a more expensive cloak from her dad's cloak supply store. It's so weird, Elizabeth.
It's so weird. I don't know. And gross and exploitative and misogynistic. But that's okay. It'll get worse later. At least now her dad's mad about it. She's just a kid.
Yes, and he is going to riotously slut-shame her in the most outlandish and overwritten way, in a way that makes even his censure of her at this point not feel real. Right? It doesn't feel real here. And when we learn later that ostensibly it was real and the outcome is even worse than we thought, it's just gross. It's bad news.
Terrible.
Bill finally gets his outfit, gets his cab. He's fantasizing further about Alice. He pulls up at the Grand Estate somewhere mysterious outside of the city, gives the password, is escorted inside into, what could be the meeting of the Bavarian Illuminati, right? Like this is a reference that we're making here very powerfully. It could be a legitimate magical ritual for all we know at this point in the story. But nope, it's just an orgy. And it's beautifully shot. It's beautifully realized, I suppose.
Shows up in a lot of film school classes for sure.
The discomfort I feel at the masked figures kissing is really weird. It's unsettling. It
is unsettling, and to me it's also stupid. Again, like if you're gonna have a sex party, you need your mouth. It's just a thing I think.
But no, I think that's a super fair point, right? Yeah. Later on, we will see people apparently performing oral sex on each other while still wearing masks, right? Which tells me that it is not about the sex. It tells me that it is about the performance of the sex, not about the actual sexual pleasure itself. That it is less of an orgy than it is a realization of the power to economically dominate others. That it's theatrical in that way?
Certainly very theatrical, yes.
That it is, to some extent, a charade?
That is just a show and a charade, yes, absolutely.
You hadn't seen this film before, is that right? But you knew what was coming because of film school.
yeah, basically not. Yeah, I had seen some pieces of it. I'd certainly never seen the full 2 hours, 40 minutes, but yeah.
Is it shocking? I mean, this is, I think, more sex than we're accustomed to. I guess what we do first is we have the young woman approach, we have the masked woman approach Bill and say, you don't belong here. You should get out of here. This is dangerous for you. If we're reading that as Mandy, we have to, I guess, we have to backfill how she recognizes him, how she knows that he doesn't belong here, how she recognizes him now that he is masked. We have to do a fair amount of legwork to justify how anything happens.
And I don't think that you can. Like, you really just have to treat the whole film like a fever dream.
Yes. I mean, perhaps, although, certainly the dismount at the end of the film suggests that it was real. And I think it's more interesting if it is real. I think it's more interesting if it is both real and impossible to understand. That it is both real and a thing that Bill Harford, that Dr. Bill can just never really reach. This is to me the distinction of social class here. That he cannot get here because he does not belong here. He wasn't born into it. He doesn't have this money. He doesn't have this power. And it doesn't matter if he has the password. It doesn't matter if he has the right outfit, because there are things endemic to him which preclude his ascension into this.
And which he cannot hide under cloak or mask.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
That is how I read it. And I think that gives us...
Did you ever watch Parasite?
No, I didn't.
That's okay. But there was one sequence in particular where basically they talk about the way the poor smell.
Oh,
and it's very interesting. And it reminds me of what you're talking about now. This idea that there is just something that you can't hide. But I think that works less well for me when Bill is so well off. I might have been more interested to see somebody a little more on the back foot, a little more like he and his wife at the beginning of The Firm, for example. When they're almost there and they are so sure that they're going to make it, to then see that they never will might be more interesting.
I absolutely agree, and I think that that's a very interesting perspective on this kind of story. I do think that there's a validity and, honestly, an originality to making him the man that he is by all external accounts successful, that he has already by all external accounts made it. He has the wife, he has the daughter, he has the thriving business, he has the $1 million apartment in Central Park West that he has already made it, but will never be it. Will never make it really into this realm of untrammeled power, right?
Yeah. You're right.
Unfortunately, from there, it all unravels pretty quickly. He gets to walk through the orgy. We get these POV shots as, just a lot of simulated sex is happening. And you're right. Yeah, both the combination of the present masks and the hordes of people just standing around watching, not in any way interacting, not in any way, it seems, taking sexual pleasure from what is happening. Maybe like an aesthetic pleasure. Maybe like, some kind of economic or authoritative pleasure from what is happening. And then, of course, he is approached again by the young woman who tells him again to leave, then by the guard who tells him that the cabbie is waiting for him.
Are you the man who arrived with the cab waiting outside? That's great.
Yes. And we can already feel the wheels coming off before he's ushered back into the grand room where now everyone is gathered around this figure in red who has some questions for Bill Harford. This is, I think, very tense. I think this sequence does work very beautifully in terms of just, raw emotional filmmaking. I think it really works. And I think Cruise is great. The demasking scene making him feel so vulnerable, making him feel so on the back foot here, and demonstrating so powerfully how completely he does not belong. Even the fact that everyone else's cloaks are intentionally colored and his is like a dark blue. Did you notice? It's not quite a black cloak. It's almost a black cloak.
I didn't realize
there's
that.
just a real tension there that, visibly he does not belong. Although the nature of that visibility, I think, is really loaded and really rich. And he is going to have a bad thing happen to him, except then the woman intervenes. She offers herself, offering to redeem him.
Redeem him. I am ready to redeem him.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you're right. All of this makes sense if this is Mandy. If we can overlook the how do you identify a person, right? If we do a little bit of legwork, a couple of insert shots here and there just to communicate how she knows that it is really him, then this works as Mandy and it all makes sense and it all is compelling. And the deliberate anticipation of that conclusion, the conclusion to which we would leap, and the foiling of that conclusion is the film playing games. It absolutely is. The woman is led away, and Bill is warned to never speak of this orgy or investigate further, and he returns home. And let me tell you a story, dear listener, of a man, a podcaster, just a guy like any other who sat down to watch a film on his laptop and take some notes before he recorded a podcast and thought for a moment that this film was about to do something incredibly special.
I'm sorry, honey.
For a second, this film really knocked me out, and then I realized that I had been mistaken. When he goes back home, he walks down the corridor toward the lamp, and there is, for maybe, 10 frames of film, an eye, a large human eye on the back of his jacket, and it is wildly unsettling. It is supernatural. It is upsetting. It is a crazy interposition on top of this film and this cinematic technique, and I was stunned by it. Only it turns out that it's not an eye. It's a product of the lenses that they were using to shoot with this naturalistic light in all of the sets. And what you're actually seeing is a negatively reflected image of the lamp at the end of the hall, mirrored in the glass of the lens itself, and just happens to be superimposed on his back. Now, did Kubrick see this and decide to keep it because it was awesome and creepy? Maybe. But it certainly isn't intentional in terms of, being a composite special effect. Right. You can see it a little later when he crosses into the living room. Exactly the same things happen with the lights on the Christmas tree across the back of his jacket as well. There, it's much more obvious what is happening. But it's all to do with the shape of the lamp and the fact that it's inverted light for dark in the glass of the lens. It's genuinely really creepy. I was shook by it when I saw it and showed you. And
you did.
It was like, this is so exciting. What the hell is this film doing? And nothing, it turns out, is what this film is doing. Certainly not supernatural eyeballs indicating that he is either being watched in that moment or that he has been tainted by the Illuminati. Either of those things would have been better than what we get, which is he goes home. Still. Bill checks in on his daughter, then he locks away his costume and goes to bed, and now we get Alice's dream, right? He walks in and she is laughing in her sleep, and she then recounts this story at his insistence. They are in an abandoned city, they are naked and they are vulnerable. Bill goes off to find clothes for them, providing, as a husband does, subtextually, and she is suddenly all at once liberated and happy and in a garden and enjoying her nakedness, right? A return to a state of nature, we might speculate. And then the naval officer appears out of the woods of the Freudian imagination, right? Out of the Jungian subconscious, right there. He comes to her and they start kissing and they start having sex. And then all at once they are surrounded by people who are watching at first and then joining in. And basically she is recapitulating the orgy that Bill has just witnessed, except it was only a dream for her. And at the end of that dream...
And she got to have lots of sex.
She got to have lots of sex. And
which she enjoyed.
Well, see, that's unclear. I'm not sure that this film is
that's true.
Confident enough to assert that she enjoyed it.
That's true. That's true.
So she has a lot of sex. And it seems clear that her discomfort in this moment is stemming from the fact that she wants in that moment for Bill to see her, that she wants him to feel humiliated, that she wants actively or inactively to cuckold him in this moment. And that she laughs at him, and that is the laughter that we heard when he woke her from her dream, which, let's rewind to this little moment first. She is laughing in her dream. He comes in and wakes her up and tells her, I thought you were having a nightmare, because he is an asshole. Because there's no sign of distress or displeasure from her at all. She is just giggling and laughing happily in her dream, and he wakes her up because he doesn't want her to be experiencing that. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, it's just too different from how he's feeling, perhaps. Yeah.
Perhaps, yeah. Or he's, skeptical that she's dreaming about her dream lover, which of course she is, kind of, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you make of this dream? What is going on here?
It should have been a good dream, first of all. It's weird that she cries her way through it. She's so full of shame. I had sex with so many men. I don't even know how many. All of that is bewildering and sad because, it's just so undercut with all of this horrible shame that she's feeling.
The shame that she's feeling for even experiencing sexual desire outside of her marriage, right? It would seem you're reading this as just a psychological extension of her fantasies about the naval officer?
Yes, she seems to have guilt now for not only wanting men outside of her marriage, but also for having sex with multiple men. I think both. And especially like at the same time and with, men she didn't know or whatever.
Sure. And then, asterisk here, all of like slut culture, right?
Right.
All of this terrible oppression that we leverage against women in particular for enjoying multiple partners and multiple combinations. Yeah.
The worst of it for her seems to be the part where she wanted him to see it and she wanted to laugh at him. But why did she tell him that part? That's what's strange.
He forces her is the thing. He says that's not all because she falters in her retelling and he then demands to be told the end of the story. Like he wants to know why she is laughing, presumably expecting that it's going to be something worse, but or something, I don't know, worse from his perspective. I don't know what is worse.
Maybe in that case, well, fine, I will tell you. Yeah, I don't know.
It's so strange. And it does challenge our understanding of her during the getting high scene earlier, during her first recounting of her sexual fantasy about the naval officer, because this is unforced. This is not a conscious desire to be seen, it would seem to me. She's being compelled in this moment. Waking from sleep and recounting this dream does not feel like the same kind of conscious undertaking as telling him about her fantasy earlier in the movie.
That's true. But she does also seem to really want and need his comfort and his forgiveness in this moment, too, with her body language.
Oh, I think so. I think that that's a pretty consistent thing, right? She does love him. They are in love, I think, with each other, and they are compatible enough domestically. It's the sexual dynamic of their relationship with each other, their relationship with themselves, their relationship with other people that seems to be underdeveloped, thwarted, I don't know, unrealized, certainly. And certainly up until this point, unacknowledged. Is there anything to be made here? I was joking about like the Jungian subconscious there, but is there anything to be made here about her basically experiencing the orgy that he just experienced in her dream?
Well, definitely, yeah. And the fact that if he wasn't in the proceedings at all, like she says that she felt better when he left in the dream to go get clothes. Yeah. And presumably, like if he had been completely absent, she would have just had a good time, right?
I mean, that's the inference, right? Yeah, because she can't laugh at him if he is absent from the dream. It's when he returns that she feels compelled to hurt him with her performance, really, Yeah, it's a complicated one.
Yeah, there's a lot there. Yeah. It makes me wish that we had seen her dream as opposed to just had her recount it.
Yeah. How do you think Kidman handles this recounting? Do you think that her performance here is strong, or does it feel a little insubstantial?
I think her performance is strong. It's just, I don't understand why she's crying so much through it, I guess. Like, it's maybe a little bit upsetting, maybe a little bit embarrassing, but she's like really distraught in a way I don't quite understand.
It does seem to come down to her, what we might interpret as a sublimated desire to humiliate Bill, that it's about a separation in their life. But yeah, she's clearly having trouble articulating, if she has to get high to talk about finding another man even attractive, right? Then she's clearly having trouble realizing and acknowledging and integrating her sexual self in terms of, this domestic expression of who they really are. Yeah. The next day, Bill goes to the jazz bar, but it is closed. He goes to the diner next door to try and get hold of Nick Nightingale. There's just a lot of shoe leather in this part of the plot. And it's maybe aiming for being a little noirish, but it doesn't come off as noirish as much as it comes off as an engine that can't quite get started. We go to the jazz bar, it's closed. We go next door to the diner, we order coffee, but maybe this is going to be the thread that takes us to the hotel, except then we have to jump ahead to the hotel. And we get Alan Cumming, which is at least very good. He's very charming, I think. In this.
Yeah, he's nice.
It's so weird to see him be so submissive, so secondary in a scene, because, one of the things that you associate with Alan Cumming now, I think, is a complete mastery of his environment, that he will outperform anyone that is on the same set as him. And yeah, this is a weirdly diffident performance from Cumming, but a very charming one, no less. We learn that Nick returned to the hotel in the wee hours, accompanied by 2 rather large gentlemen and a bruised eye, and then checked out, presumably to return to Seattle. But we are never going to find out for sure what happened to Nick Nightingale. Not until Eyes Wide Shut 2, Eyes Slightly Open. Not coming soon to a movie theater near you. Bill goes to Mr. Milich to return the costume without the mask, which has mysteriously disappeared. Milich rings up the bill. Then his daughter and the guys from the previous night come out of a back room. He has apparently very happily sold his daughter into some kind of sex work prostitution arrangement.
Yep.
With these much older Asian men, and then furthermore implies that Bill could also possess her for the right price.
Exactly.
It's bad news.
Awful and gross. I would have cut it.
Yeah.
But again, it's just the interrogation of sex in this film is so strange. It makes me wonder if Stanley Kubrick ever had sex in his life. Did he have a family?
He did.
Well,
yeah.
Then I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
Yeah.
It is weird. I guess charitably what we might interpret here is the kind of sordid diminution of sexual desire into a commercial transaction, right? We could maybe interpret Lily Sobieski's, I would love to give this character a name, but I'm afraid she does not get
Doesn't have one.
Daughter Milich, right?
Yeah.
If we can interpret her engagement with these men the night before as being something that was spontaneous and authentic and sprang forth from a mutual desire, right? She just really wanted to have sex with these 2 somewhat older guys, but
which is what happened in the first instance, for
exactly.
sure.
Well, speculatively, yes. I mean, we might be inclined now to infer that it was a setup all the way from the beginning, but
who knows?
Who can say for sure? But yeah, now that has been commodified. Now that has been taken out of the realm of sexual desire and put into the realm of finance and economics, which is, the ongoing push-pull tug that we get throughout the whole thing, whether it's hiring Domino or it's going back to Domino's apartment, which we're about to do.
Yeah.
And, almost having sex with her roommate. That conflict between sexual desire and wealth and privilege in its broadest sense seems to be the thematic heart of this entire film, right? Like, what is one, what is the other, and how do we mistake the one for the other? Seems to be a powerful theme. Would you agree?
I think I do agree. Yeah. I think what's missing from it might be just the part of sex that is good between 2 people,
sure.
Whether they're
absolutely.
just having fun or whether they're having a deep emotional connection. We don't see either of those things happen.
No. And where we do acknowledge an emotional connection, it is, it's between Bill and Alice, and it's entirely separated from the realm of the sexual until literally the last line of the film, which feels forced and unhappy
strange.
and not good for either one of them. And either way, we are talking explicitly about, the forcing into prostitution of a 15-year-old girl.
I mean,
this is bad news. After another fantasy flash of Alice and the naval officer, Bill is brooding at his office before he cancels all of his afternoon appointments and drives back out to the mysterious manor house.
Bad news. Why would you do that? Well, why are you being dumb, Bill?
Really bad idea.
Dumb Bill.
Let's study this. Why is he doing it, right? Is it about this social mobility? Is it about there being a social class to which he cannot belong? This is why he is so subservient to Victor Ziegler at the Christmas party. This is why he's trying so hard to fit in with those people. That he
I don't know.
Wants
at this point, he seems to be wanting to expose them.
Oh, that's an interesting interpretation.
Now he thinks that they've killed Nick Nightingale.
Sure,
or at least roughed him up.
Yeah.
He seems to want to get to the heart of what is happening here and expose the people and bring them to justice is what I'm seeing. He seems to be doing real detective
much
work.
More traditionally heroic role.
Yeah.
For sure. It's a much more anticipated Tom Cruise role than, descending into an obsession about, social mobility and sex power, right? That's interesting.
I don't sense at this point that he wants to be invited to the party for real.
Yes, though it's also not as simple as I am on a quest for justice, because after he goes home again, and we have that very brief scene very significantly where Alice and Helena are working on her homework, and it is all about how much money do these boys have. Did you catch that?
I did.
It's all just calculating the financial worth of these boys in this little math word problem. He then lies. Bill lies and goes back out into the city. He goes to his office. He calls Marion, the woman who came onto him after her father died, obviously, and is thwarted when her fiance picks up the phone instead. And then he specifically goes to see Domino and brings her a present. And she's not home either. And he seems absolutely just about ready to settle for her roommate, Sally, right? He is literally undoing her shirt before she summons up the courage, apparently believing that he did sleep with Domino the night before. She summons up the courage to tell him that Domino has just been diagnosed as HIV positive, which is, of course, the specter that is hanging over the thought of casual sex in the 1990s, right? Like, if you have casual sex, you will die. This is not even a moral predicament. This is an issue of life and death. And it's a terrible thing. I don't like the film invoking the specter of HIV at this point. It doesn't feel that the film has earned it, or that it is going to in any way meaningfully interrogate it, except as a normalizing maneuver, a conservative normalizing maneuver to resituate all sexual desire within a long-standing monogamous relationship, which I don't feel great about, honestly.
Not at all. It's a very prudish movie.
It is prudish, right? And again, intentionally so. I think we're now coming to the understanding intentionally so. But to answer those unanswered questions in the reviews that were contemporary with the release of the film, is this film supposed to be sexy? No. Is this film sexy? No, obviously not. But is the film supposed to be? You are maybe supposed to be titillated for a moment, but if you are definitely supposed to feel bad about it.
Exactly.
You are definitely supposed to feel shame for ogling these women as you move through the orgy scene, for example. And that ultimately, this is a shame-generating mechanism at the heart of this film, which is a thing that fundamentally sucks. That is a film that is fundamentally
Not
shitty.
for
right?
me. Yeah.
Not least of all because it is, shame is a mechanism, particularly shame with regard to sex, is a mechanism of oppression. It's been weaponized against women for as long as there have been women, right? It's just gross, and we shouldn't be doing that.
Agreed.
Bill goes out walking again. He determines, I guess, that he is being followed, though whether or not he is being followed is also kind of pleasantly ambiguous.
I think he's being followed. But
I think so too. But there's a certain tension. It does make me wish.
There's no one else. You're right, in the streets of New York.
Right, which is creepy, honestly. It does make me wish. We talked earlier about Kubrick leaping from genre to genre, about never repeating himself, and it does make me kind of wish that he had done at some point just a straight noir thriller.
Yeah.
I would have loved to have seen
the noir elements are really cool,
particularly with his cinematic skill. I would have loved to see what he could do with the conventions of that genre. From here, I'm glad to say the plot moves pretty quickly. We get the stopping at the newsstand, stopping at the coffee shop, finding the news article about the overdose at that point of the former beauty queen.
Terrible headline. So confusing.
Yes.
What?
So deliberately confusingly worded. There is a great little Easter egg in that article too. If you study the closing text, it says that Amanda Curran was known to have a relationship with the fashion designer Leon Vitali. Leon Vitali is a British actor who worked with Kubrick many times, and who is in this film the guy in the red cloak at the orgy. That's
so
Leon
cool.
Vitali. So she was in effect in a relationship, and is that guy in the red cloak Leon Vitali himself? Because we never find out the identity of that person. Interesting, right? Bill goes to investigate only to learn that Amanda has died. It's good that his medical board card or whatever can get him into any hospital, into any morgue. No security whatsoever here in 1999. He goes to examine the body. We get the flashback of her words at the orgy, because it could cost me my life and possibly yours, connecting these two things together again.
There's the almost
it's so
corpse
confusing.
kiss.
So weird.
So weird.
Like, we might interpret that it's a desire to sexually possess this woman even in death. But
it doesn't seem sexual, though.
I don't know. I mean, it could also be interpreted as like a benediction, right? That he's going
to
kiss her forehead and like wish her well. That's a weird
more like that
beat to it. It's very, very strange and very, very long.
Very long.
He's then summoned to see Ziegler, who pours him scotch, 25-year-old scotch, and then
this is a great set.
Fantastic set. It's
fantastic
so
set,
good.
except the world's weirdest bar. When he's like, hey, let me pour you a drink. And he just has a massive table covered with booze. Like, you have like 1,600 square feet in here,
There's
sir.
no like mixing glasses. Nary a jigger to be seen.
So strange.
He just takes his liquor neat is what we know from him. And this is where it kind of gets, unspooled for Bill. He's offered the opportunity to believe that this is a charade. He's offered the opportunity to believe that it is not true so that he can, by implication, go back to his real life, believing this comfortable lie rather than feeling compelled to confront the truth. We get, as we discussed earlier, that very ambiguous connection between these two characters who are played by different actresses, but are apparently coterminous the one with the other. And that's weird too. This entire thing is just kind of unsettling. And it ends without real resolution there, I think. Does this work for you as a way of resolving the mysteries of the film, or does it only heighten the mysteries of the film? Or are you at this point so disinterested in the mysteries of the film that you're looking at the running time?
Yeah, a little bit disinterested. I am satisfied with the girl from the party being Mandy. That makes sense for me, and I like it.
It does make sense narratively.
Yes, and I need something in this film to make sense narratively. So I'm happy to get that little bone to chew on. What doesn't work for me is when he immediately goes home and just starts like sobbing. I'm like, my guy.
It's the mask on the pillow, though, isn't it? It's the proof that someone was in his apartment. Surely the mask is staged there as a veiled threat, right? That this is, you'd better look out because we can get access to you, your home, your wife, your child at any point. So it's all a charade. It's all just a fake thing. It's really just like a role-playing thing that we do. We've all had these character sheets that we've had for like 15 years. We go, a couple people have sex. Yes, just like any role-playing group. Don't tell me that they don't. But really, it's just a thing we do, up at a manor house in the Hudson River Valley every 6 months or so. Yeah, the mask on the pillow absolutely removes the possibility that he can go on with his life believing that it was a charade. This is an explicit threat.
But then why would Ziegler try to have just so he stops?
I wonder if it's Ziegler. I wonder if it's him. I wonder if they are at odds here, right? Because Ziegler's feeling threatened that he was the one who invited Nick Nightingale into their arrangement. He was the one who recommended him. And now, as he says, he looks like an asshole. And obviously he's going to look like even more of an asshole if his buddy, the doctor, managed to Shanghai his way into this party. I don't know is the answer. But I also don't buy just this emotional breakdown and confession here at the end. Though
I'll tell you everything.
The very hard cut from I'll tell you everything to Nicole Kidman looking like she's been up all night smoking a cigarette with like fuck you eyes.
Yeah.
Ooh, that is the hardest cut in modern cinema.
Yeah.
It's so brutal.
Yep.
And then they take Helena out to a toy store because we're back in like capitalism and the expenditure of wealth, right? We're back into the purchasing of trinkets that will bring momentary joy. And it's really about your power over the thing rather than having the thing itself. Alice says they should be grateful that they've survived these, quote, adventures, whether they were real or only a dream. Maybe they won't have forever, but they do need to do something as soon as possible, which is, Elizabeth?
Fuck.
Bad line or worst line? Bad emotional resolution or worst emotional resolution?
I mean, it's like, is it supposed to be ironic? Is it supposed to be funny? Is it supposed to be flirty?
No, I think it's the acknowledgement from Alice that they are people possessed of sexual desire, and the only safe outlet for that sexual desire is the person that you are married to. So they had better have sex with each other, because if they're not having sex with each other, they might be tempted to be led astray, and that is a world of danger and death.
Ooh.
Again, super conservative.
So prudish, so conservative.
Yeah.
Ick.
Not so great, maybe. Yeah. And now I have to try and encourage you to be gentle with this film as we put it on the list of every Tom Cruise movie ever. Can you give me any insight as to how you're feeling? Just an emotional response to this film before we try and compare it to the others.
Yeah. The production design and the cinematography of this film are so gorgeous that it's going to bump it up. Like, it's an art film, and I just think an art film gets more credit than, something that would be, say, way on the bottom of the list, because otherwise that's where I would put this movie. So it's going to go at least up into like the interesting territory. Right now I'm thinking somewhere around where The Outsiders was.
The Outsiders currently number 10 on the list.
See, yeah, which is roughly in the middle. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
The Outsiders are currently right underneath Far and Away. And I guess that's an interesting point of comparison.
Yes.
Right? Far and Away is a film with obvious problems, narrative and stridently political.
Right.
How do we feel about this film versus Far and Away? And an interesting contrast, too, between directors, right? Because you've got a very ambiguous and experimentalist filmmaker on the one hand and the safest pair of hands in Hollywood on the other. So how do you think those compare?
I think Far and Away is better. I think Far and Away is just more satisfying. When you watch it and you get to the end, you feel like, yeah, okay, that was a movie. And when you watch it and you get to the end of Eyes Wide Shut, I feel like you're just, I feel a little bit like I was in the pit of despair. I've just sucked 1 year of your life away. Like there's just a little, I don't feel good having watched this movie.
I can see that. I really do. And I think that if we're looking at this as just a conventional piece of narrative filmmaking, that, I might even be tempted to put it lower on the list than that. For me, it gets something of a pass because I think that it is interesting. And I think that the ideas that it's contending with are interesting. And I think that for all we've discussed this film being a conservative parable about sex, the fact that we end in such a bleak place, to me, opens the possibility that Kubrick himself is not co-signing that interpretation of the film. He actually thinks that regressive sexual, politics are harmful, and that maybe everyone should just be going to wild bacchanals from time to time. Though those bacchanals should probably be more of the Ziegler Christmas party than the mysterious orgy in the forest kind of sort. So I'm not sure about it. And I think there's a lot there. I think it's interesting. I might be tempted, but honestly, we're not that far apart because I might be tempted to put it above Far and Away, right underneath Legend, because if I think we're talking about sublimated sexual desire, it sits companionably along Legend. And
Unlike and for production design, it sits companionably too.
Yeah, unlike the relatively chaste Far and Away. I think that this film is neither, and this is perhaps the most damning thing that you can say about it, it is neither an outright travesty or a work of unimpeachable genius. It is a fine film that does some interesting things and ultimately leaves a sour taste in the mouth. Is kind of where I'm coming from, which is actually very much how I felt about Far and Away now that I say it. So I will leave it to you. Above or below Far and Away, that's underneath Legend or above The Outsiders. That feels to me to be about right.
About where we live.
Yeah.
Let's put it under Far and Away. We also get that nice dream sequence. It's not a dream sequence, but it feels so dreamy when they're this is in Far and Away, when they're in the rich house together.
Yeah,
Pretend That You Love Me.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm going to say that's better. That scene alone, better than Eyes Wide Shut.
All right. Well, there it is. And kind of, I don't know, a disappointing end to this era of Tom Cruise's career, I suppose. Though it's much less of a marked turning point than many people apprehend it to be, we still have to close out the 20th century. We still have to close out 1999. Next week on the show, Paul Thomas Anderson's Magnolia. PTA's a director that you kind of like, right? We're going to go into next week's movie definitely wanting it. We're going to go in with an open heart and a positive mind, as we always try to.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Phantom Thread. I just thought it was so weird and wonderful.
Yeah.
And then we watched Licorice Pizza, and I was like, okay, sure.
Licorice Pizza does not hang together well. And has some challenges at its heart, for sure. But certainly there's some interesting stuff happening there. And seeing what PTA can do with Tom Cruise while Cruise is still in this era of submitting himself to the will of the great directors of the period, I think it's going to be a very interesting.
I'm interested for sure
too. So that's going to be next week on The Last Star in Hollywood. Normally at this point in the show, we thank our wonderful superstar patrons, but as we discussed on last week's show, we're recording a little bit in advance. So if you have just signed up for the Patreon at patreon.com/nextword and pledged your support, we probably won't get to your name this week, but we will make up for it when we come back. When Elizabeth returns from your sojourn in LA to your work trip out there to shoot a movie, then we'll catch up with everything then. Would you like to thank our existing superstar patrons?
I would indeed. Our thanks and gratitude to Leslie Skipa, Louise in Dallas, Megan Lauder, Phoebe, Art Kilmer, Kimberly Bear, and Self on a Shelf.
Guys, thank you so much for your support. You make all of this possible. And I promise that if we ever throw a mysterious party in a manor house up in the forest, you'll all be invited. The password is Fidelio. And if you, dear listener, would like to pledge your support, you can head on over, as I said, to patreon.com/nextword, where you can find bonus episodes of this show, bonus episodes of my literary podcast, Stars and Swords. Oh, and a new insider, unscripted, unedited podcast where we talked about musical episodes of TV shows that we like. That was a ton of fun.
That was a lot of fun.
Do you want to know what our favorite musical episode of a TV show is? The answer might surprise you. Head on over to patreon.com/nextword. That's going to do it for this week. Next week, we'll be back with Magnolia. Until then, thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.